The book of Hebrews is all about the priestly ministry of Jesus Christ, and the Apostle Paul is doing a rather deep theological treatise on the ministry of Christ as our high priest. And in chapter 5, he's going into the ways that Christ is has a priesthood according to the order of Melchizedek, and he's a pretty deep theological stuff. But right there in verse 12, right at the close of chapter 5, he kind of makes a sharp break, and he almost seems to change subject and honestly appears to be writing out of frustration. Listen to what he says. Hebrews chapter 5, starting with verse 12. To his audience, he writes, "For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the first principles of the oracles of God. And you have come to need milk and not solid food. For everyone who partakes only of milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But solid food belongs to those who are of full age, that is, those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil." So again, he's writing this deep theological doctrinal treatise, and he stops and he gets a little frustrated, and he talks to some people who are clearly not brand new in the faith, because he opens it by saying, "For though by this time," as if some reasonable amount of time has gone by, he says, "You ought to be teachers." But then he says, "You need someone to teach you again the first principles of the word of God, and have come to need milk and not solid food." Paul seems to be frustrated. The people he's teaching have already been taught and should themselves be teachers, but he's having to go and retrace the same. What's the issue? What's the holdup here? Well, he gives us that answer. Look again at verse 14. He said, "But solid food belongs to those who are of full age." And he explains what that is. That is, those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. It strikes me that these people were receiving and receiving and receiving, but apparently weren't putting to use that which they were being taught. They weren't in turn teaching others, and so instead of growing in their spirituality, they're actually reverting and needing the first truths over and over and over again. As Seventh Adventists, we've been given a precious message to give to the world, and oftentimes we feel that we need to hear it over and over and over again, when in reality, one of the best ways to raise our own spiritual life is to actually share what we know with others. It's in sharing that we become more apt for learning, and we develop more like Christ. So I would challenge you, if you feel a little stumped in your walk with Christ, or if you're always just feeding and feeding on the word, Sabbath after Sabbath and sermon after sermon, start listening to sermons in a different way. Don't listen just to hear, but listen with the purpose of sharing with others, and see what the Lord will do both for you and the blessing he'll be to others through you. God bless, friends.